What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and welcome back to A Point in Focus, the official podcast for the Points in Focus YouTube channel and pointsinfocus.com for that matter. And this is the podcast I'm recording for Saturday, October 19th. So not going to be, I think, a particularly long one. I've only got two things on my to-do list to talk about. And, without any further ado, let's just get right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is I got a couple of weeks ago an email from a gentleman named David Henwick, goes by the name Dr. Quads in some places, or at the 33rd frame or 33rd frame on YouTube. He put together a 3D printed add-on package unit thing to mount to your R5C. He calls it a Cinebooty. And basically it's a external battery thing, cable management, that kind of deal. I know a lot of people out there are interested in that kind of thing or like the kind of more box camera form factor for most of their applications. It can be especially useful, I know, for handheld stuff. So he sent me a link to his video showing this, and that's why I'm talking about it, because, well, the short of it is I went, watched his video, and said, hey, this is pretty cool. It's 3D printed. He's giving away the STL files so you can print your own or have it printed from somewhere else, that can print STL files, essentially. Like I said, I thought it looked pretty cool. Certain parts of it I don't care about, like the whole back part, but certain parts of it, like the cable clamp that he put together for it, I think look really slick. Unfortunately, I don't have a 3D printer yet, and I don't or haven't had the time to, send this off, or in some ways inclination, to send this off and have it printed and play with it myself. So I don't have any personal experience with this. On top of that, I am getting no compensation for this whatsoever. He's not charging anybody to download the STL files, so there's no, agreement or, nothing. There's no money transferring from anybody's hands, really. You can go download it, print it yourself. He didn't ask for me to talk about this. He didn't ask for me to show this to you guys or bring this up for you guys. He just sent me an email and said that I might be interested in it. I watched his video. I thought it was pretty interesting, at least, like I said, the cable clamp design that he came up with. And that's why I'm sharing it. So I've linked his video in the description. You can go check it out, see what this is all about. And if this is something that you find useful or might find useful, then maybe you want to give it a try. If you do give it a try and you like it or you don't like it, I'm always interested to hear how things go. So that would be something cool to leave in the feedback or in the comments if you have tried this or, whatever. Let me know how it worked out for you. The main topic that I want to talk today about a little bit is, comes in the form of a question. Question is, what does Canon's L quality really mean? When Canon says this is L quality optics or whatever, what does that really even mean anymore? What got me thinking about this was a couple of weeks ago, I talked about Canon's new RF 28-70 f2.8 STM, their entry-level budget 28-70 2.8 constant aperture zoom. And in the video, or in Canon's materials for that, they talk about it's dust and weather sealed, but the big one that they stood out to me is they say that it's L image or has L image quality. Even though it's not being marketed or sold as an L lens, they're still saying L image quality. And that got me thinking, what does it even mean anymore when Canon says L image quality? I mean, there's a whole lot of things that affect or that are part of image quality. Goes through the whole thing. Resolution, distortion, vignetting, chroma, astigmatism, the list goes on and on. You can open any optical engineering textbook and look at the whole chromatic aberrations. You can look at the whole slew of issues that lens designers have to deal with. The thing I wanted to focus on a little bit in this discussion was distortion. Traditionally, of course, in SLRs, distortion, because it would be something you would see in the viewfinder, has to be corrected optically. And so all of our SLR lenses that we may have had as SLR shooters, or that we may be bringing over into our mirrorless time now, are going to be largely corrected for distortion. They're not going to mechanically vignette and rely on, or have extreme like 8 or 10% distortion, and then rely on the camera's software distortion correction or your post-processing environment's software distortion correction to stretch things back out into a distortion-free image. That used to be the case. Now, of course, on a mirrorless camera, what you see is what you get, except till it's not. Because you can't actually look through the lens, it is now a lot more practical to, you're looking at a processed image in the viewfinder. It is a lot more practical for lens designers to rely on software corrections to fix things that used to have to be done in the optical process, in the optical element or design, to get around issues and limitations and make things cheaper and so on and so forth. And so we have seen an increasing number of lenses, and this is not just a Canon only thing, this is across the brands for the most part. Nikon does this, Sony does this, but I would argue that Canon has been the, well, one way to put it is most egregious, and another way to put it is most aggressive. And I'm not sure which the right way to put it is, because the old school photographer says egregious, and the more realistic approach is perhaps not so much egregious, maybe just aggressive. So what do I mean by this? And why does this have to do with L lenses or L image quality? Well, it used to be that I would assume that a lens might need a lot of distortion correction if it was designed as an entry-level lens. The idea is that correcting distortion and correcting lens aberrations, especially correctable, software correctable lens aberrations in a lens, makes the lens more expensive. You need more glass, you need more complex glass elements, you need more complicated designs. You go through the whole list of things, and instead of having a $200 lens, you have a $300 lens, or instead of having a $500 lens, you have an $800 lens, or so on up the food chain because of these added costs. Now, it used to be, or at least my perception, I really shouldn't say it used to be, because this is really just my perception, but my perception of things has always been that when you get into the, quote, L lenses, the luxury, or whatever Canon actually means when they say L, that you are now talking about lenses that go the extra mile to correct these things, to make sure that the image quality being delivered to the sensor is as good as possible. And one of those is distortion correction. Now, I am on record, I have said this before. I would rather have a lens that has hard to correct optical aberrations, spherical aberrations, lateral, the hard to correct chromatic aberration, because it deals with focus distance as opposed to just the blurring of colors across contrasty lines, and the name slips my mind at the moment. Having stuff like that corrected in the lens, I'll take distortion and have the software correct the distortion out, because it's a way harder, if not impossible, prospect to have software correct out the other errors. Now, when I was originally saying that, and I originally came to that conclusion and developed that position, I realized, or I wasn't thinking or expecting that the things would be taken as far as, I would argue, Canon is taking those things. And they're still doing it in L lenses. So there are a slew of lenses now, L lenses, that have extreme distortion, at least 5%, if not more, barrel distortion, and require distortion correction. So some examples of this: the RF 10-20 f4L IS STM. It's a $2,300 lens. It requires distortion correction because the distortion, especially at 10 millimeters, is so extreme that you can't really use it otherwise. The 14-35 f4L IS USM, which, okay, this is only a $1,300 lens, and the distortion on that lens is not nearly as extreme as some of the other lenses that we're talking about, but it still requires distortion correction to make the widest angle images, quote, usable. It's maybe a bit arguable in this case, but at least in the case of the 14-35 f4L, Canon will not let you shoot on an R5 in multiple exposure mode with that lens because of the requirement for distortion correction to fix things up. The new RF 24-105 f4L IS USM-Z, the super high-end, I mean, arguably, it's a $3,000 lens. It's arguably the highest-end cinema or video hybrid lens that Canon makes right now, has an incredibly good focal range. Did I say f4L? I meant f2.8L. The RF 24-70 or 24-105 f2.8L IS USM-Z. $3,000. It's an incredibly useful, powerful lens, but it does require distortion correction at 24 millimeters to have a usable image. And even the RF 35mm f1.4 VC or f1.4L VCM, arguably the fast, professional, high-end 35mm prime, it's a $2,100 lens, and it still relies incredibly heavily on distortion correction. Now, I'm bringing all of this up because I'm half of the mind that this is bad, and I'm half of the mind that I'm just obsolete or antiquated in my thinking about this. And that maybe it is time to reevaluate the right way lenses should be designed to get image quality. Again, I come from the thought process that this should all be done optically in the lens, not that we should be relying on software, not that we should be that reliant on software. Software is good. Software fixes up the optical deficiencies, but I should still be able to use the lens without having to distortion correct it and have so much or such extreme distortion in my image that it's not basically unusable. But here's the thing. While I'm saying that, you can go look up lens reviews and tests. In the case of, for example, the RF 35 f1.4L VCM, if you compare that to its predecessor, the EF 35 f1.4L2 USM, it's sharper. It's even sharper in the corners where the most distortion correction is being applied and the image is being stretched and messed with the most. And if the argument is that the lens should deliver the best image quality, and that means delivering in many ways not soft or blurry corners or extreme corners, so the distorted lens is better. And this preconception that I have that things should be fixed in the lens, distortion at least should be fixed in the lens, especially in L lenses where the image quality is maximum, or at least on Canon's line, that's not a really good thought process. The same is actually true for the RF 24-105 f2.8L versus its predecessor, the RF 24-70 f2.8L. Okay, they both have different focal ranges, but I'm really only interested at 24 millimeters where the distortion issue is optimal. And you can go look at the test images over from the digital picture. You can go look at reviews from various places that have comparative MTF scores. The 24-105 f2.8 is sharper in the corners, even though it's being corrected out, than the 24-70 is, which isn't being corrected out. And that brings me to my dilemma, the dissonance that I'm dealing with or trying to deal with in this whole thought process. Is distortion really a problem? I mean, if the images still look better, does it really matter if it's being corrected optically or being corrected in the camera by the software? And like I said, a big part of me says, no, it needs to be fixed optically. That's the right way to do it. But a big part of me is also going and looking at these lenses like the 35-1.4 and the 24-105 2.8 and going, but they're, even with the distortion correction, the lens is still sharper in the corners than the undistorted equivalents that are closest to it, at least in Canon's product line. And I have to wonder, because if you're fixing the distortion in the lens by essentially optically stretching the corners of the image, you're going to have lower resolution because you're optically stretching things, or at least you have the potential for that to be a problem. The distortion correction's doing the same thing. Is there a difference? Is it better? Does it matter? I know one place where it kind of matters is with depth of field. Well, sort of. I say kind of matters because people love to punch numbers into depth of field calculators and look at, oh, if I'm shooting with this lens at this aperture, at this focus distance, I have this much depth of field. But the reality is depth of field is all kind of BS. I mean, it's there, the effect happens, but anything that's trying to put specific, or anything that's putting specific numbers to it is, if you don't understand where those numbers are coming from, you really have a hard time, like, knowing that the numbers are kind of all lies. That anything you do to the image, cropping, your tolerance for what is and isn't out of focus, your vision, how far you're viewing the print or the picture on your monitor from. There's this laundry list of things that affect depth of field, and in some cases can affect it quite significantly, that most people who are doing the math or who just learn about depth of field or who don't get into the actual physics and optics and engineering behind it don't even appreciate how much of a gray area all of this is. I mean, the same thing's true. I mean, the part people like to talk about in terms of depth of field, the circle of confusion. There's multiple rules for how the circle of confusion is derived. What it actually comes from, or the actual process to get there, is not well at all understood by the vast majority of people looking into this, and therefore it's taken as a number and a gospel, but it's not really that accurate or that definitive. So yeah, a heavily distorted lens, or a lens that mechanically vignettes because the image is not quite covering the picture or the image area of your sensor and then gets stretched out to cover it, yeah, that lens certainly may not generate the same depth of field that you would calculate for that lens, but then the calculation is all kind of a vague gray area anyway. So I know I feel like I'm kind of bagging on Canon here a little bit. Sony and Nikon, I don't really know what the deal is with Panasonic and Olympus and Fuji and so forth. I don't follow those brands nearly as much as I follow Canon, Nikon, and Sony. They still have this issue Sony has lenses, at least one, it's an entry-level lens that has so much distortion that distortion correction is mandatory. Nikon has a slew of lenses, and while none of their lenses are quite as egregious as what Canon has done or what Sony does or has done, Nikon has a slew of lenses that have required mandatory distortion correction. And I would, in some ways, like Canon to be more, well, ideally I'd like Canon to do better. I'd like them to put out lenses with less distortion, especially in the L line. In the entry-level line, I'm a lot more forgiving of this kind of thing if it brings the cost of the lenses down and makes the cameras and lenses more accessible to people. I think photography on the whole, photography as a fine art, as the kind of process where you are going to shoot with a camera and and lenses and interchangeable lenses, as opposed to just what you're going to shoot on your smartphone. I think ensuring that there is another generation of people or continued to come into the hobby or the profession as, at the entry level, I think that's a really solid requirement or a good thing. And this is regardless of brand, Canon, Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, whatever. It doesn't matter. There needs to be an entry tier. There needs to be people coming in and buying into the brand. It's taking up photography as a serious endeavor, something I don't really feel, at least in my experience at least, that you can do on a smartphone. That as good as they have gotten, I've never gotten an image off of my iPhone 12, 15, whatever. I've never gotten an image that is as good as an image that I get just shooting haphazardly off of my mirrorless cameras, which is why I continue to shoot with mirrorless cameras, but that's neither here nor there. There needs to be an entry level, and those lenses and cameras need to be accessible. And if egregious distortion that gets corrected in software is a way to keep that lens's price in the price range that it can be affordable to more people, I don't really have a problem with that. I kind of start having a problem when you get into the higher end lenses, the so-called professional lenses, where the distortion and other aberrations are, well, again, is it really the bad way to go? Is it really wrong? Or am I just carrying my prejudices from the way it used to be, the fact that cameras couldn't do this kind of processing in real time or effectively, and therefore, or had an optical viewfinder and therefore had to just, correct the lens as much as possible, into an era where the technology is changing. Because I guess the other argument that you can make here, and I think I'll cover this and then draw this to a close, but the other argument that you could make here is, of course, you're not using your whole sensor. If the lens the distorted image is smaller than the active area of the sensor, then at some portion of your sensor that you paid for isn't being used when you shoot at that focal length on that lens. And that in turn, of course, means that you're not using all of the resolution of your sensor. You're only using some of it. Now, we're not talking about anything like a case where you're cropping 60% of the resolution out or something like that, but you could make an argument that the distortion, that some of the extreme distortion of some of these lenses is not utilizing the full capabilities of the sensor. And of course, on the counterpoint to that I would make, and I don't really have any problem making this, is one, we can look at lenses that don't have these extreme distortion levels and see they don't perform as well as the lenses that do have these extreme distortion levels. I brought up some examples, the 3514L, whether it's the RF1 or the second generation EF1, the RF lens is better. even though it's not using all of the area on my sensor. The other aspect of this question, and this is one that's probably a lot more controversial, is just how much resolution is enough. I'm really glad, honestly, that Canon kept the R5 Mark II at 45 megapixels, or 44 point whatever. Nikon has very seriously understood this situation, and they have kept their cameras at 45 megapixels. It goes all the way back to the D810 in 2014, 15, somewhere in that area, the mid-2010s. And there's no real strong indication that they're going to up the resolution of their full-frame cameras anytime soon. Sony certainly has higher resolution cameras, but in the case of the A7R, the last 2 generations have been 60 megapixels. And rumor has it that the A1 is going to continue to be 50 megapixels in its Mark II release, whenever that comes, potentially later this year. Likewise, you look at Canon's, well, even the R3 and the R1, both of which are 24 megapixel cameras. So is the R6 series. 24 megapixels is also where Nikon's Z6 series sits. And you say, well, that's not nearly as much resolution as these other cameras, and that's true, but it's also about the best resolution that you had in fine-grained, high-performance color film. Now, the argument, of course, why this gets controversial is, well, why compare it to film? You should compare it because cameras are better and higher resolution lets you do things like crop more and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I understand the arguments, but we also run into optical issues with things like diffraction as you go up the resolution. A EOS R5 or a Nikon Z9 or even more so in the case of an A1 or an A7R 5 or whatever the latest generation is, I think it's 5. All of those cameras are diffraction limited at apertures that are not very high. The Z9, the AR5, they're diffraction limited at f7.1. Stopping down beyond f7.1 will never improve your image quality in terms of sharpness. You're into the diffraction era regime. Diffraction is going to continue to soften the image. You may see minimal to no improvement going to f11. Beyond that, you're going to lose image quality. In the case of the A1, it's the diffraction limited aperture is less than 7.1. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. And the A7R, it's even lower than that because we're talking 60 megapixels. The higher the resolution, the lower the diffraction limited aperture ends up being. And that imposes problems in terms of image sharpness and diffraction and so on and so forth. So when we're talking about, you know, how much resolution do we really need? And can these lenses, and more specifically for this discussion, can these lenses that are doing the extreme distortion provide sufficient image quality on these cameras, even at, say, 24 megapixels? The reality is as far as I could tell at least, they're doing better than we did for years and years and years with film. And they're doing better than we did at the start of the digital era, even with the limitation of the extreme distraction. Yet, it still bothers me. So, I think that ended up being a little bit more rambly than I had anticipated, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because this is a problem I think we're going to have going forward, if you want to call it a problem. The further we go down the line, you know, and I don't know, honestly. Like, you could say right now, oh, look, Canon's being crap and you shouldn't shoot Canon because of what they're doing with their lenses. But I don't know how long it's going to stay the case on Nikon and Sony's and Panasonic's and everybody else's end of the line. The reality is software is an incredible drug, is the best way I can put it. And as more companies realize with the AI-trained algorithms and better understanding or more processing power in the cameras and so forth. Not that I know of any AI process being used to do distortion correction, that more and more can be left to software or shifted to software from the optical process. I think we're going to see more and more lenses that are doing this kind of things from other companies. And it's, again, like I said, the great dilemma that I keep having is, if the lens is better than its predecessor and it's doing this, is it really bad? Anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up here. That said, I hope you found this useful, or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Finally, if you'd like to help and support this channel, you can help us for free by liking this video, sharing it with your friends on the social media platform of your choice, and leaving a comment with your experiences. Likewise, you can support us directly by hitting that thanks button or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.